Okay, welcome everyone to the Charleston Leadership Interview with Deborah Caldwell-Stone, Director of the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom. I'm Heather Staines. I'll be having this conversation with Deborah here today. I'm a Senior Strategy Consultant for Delta Think and one of the Charleston Library Conference Directors. Welcome, Deborah. We're so excited to have you here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Heather, and I'm looking forward to the conference next week.
Great. Before we sort of get into the conference, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background and how it informs what you do now in your role at ALA.
Well, really two things. I've always been a reader. I was an early reader. I love books. I was the person who took my little Huffy bike and the wicker basket in front and loaded it with books, read all the books and took them back the next week to the library. So I cherish libraries, I cherish reading. And I've, always really been a person who appreciated the ability to find whatever I wanted on the shelves of a library because, my family background, I couldn't afford to buy the books I wanted to read. So I've always been a devoted advocate for libraries. And then when I went on in my education, I developed a real appreciation for the First Amendment and the freedoms it protects. I was managing editor of a college newspaper. I started to observe what was going on with censorship. And so when eventually I found myself in law school, I devoted myself to learning all I could about First Amendment freedoms, how to protect them, the principles that lay behind them. And so that led me to a place where I was an attorney practicing in other areas of the law, but with a deep appreciation for what libraries do and what the First Amendment does for our civil liberties. So when I had an opportunity to come to the American Library Association and do precisely that work, both support libraries and support the freedom to read and support the First Amendment, I jumped at it.
Thank you for that. I want to talk just a little bit more about your legal background. I think it's so interesting. When we prepared for our conversation today, it seems like even your choice of theses topics when you were in school kind of set you on the path of freedom of the press and First Amendment and privacy issues. Can you tell us a little bit more about that interest?
Well, as part of my final seminar on the law behind the First Amendment, we all had to write a thesis, a final class paper, and I chose to write about John Milton's Areopagitica as the foundation for, the freedom of the press, freedom to publish, the freedom of thought, the freedom of belief, really the protection of the ability to form one's own conscience as the foundation for what we call the First Amendment or intellectual freedom or academic freedom. And I would distinguish First Amendment from intellectual freedom because one is law, one is rules, but one is founded on protecting the inherent dignity and rights of every individual to learn, to discover for themselves, make up their own minds, pursue their own inquiries. And so I think that's important to remember. So
you've worked on so many interesting cases in your legal career. If you wouldn't mind, I'm calling today and joining from Connecticut, and I know you worked on the case of the Connecticut Four. Can you talk a little bit about that case, how you got involved in it, and how that you think it still has a lot of relevance today?
Well, as the Connecticut Four were 4 librarians, part of the Library Connection, a consortium that provides computer services to a number of public libraries in Connecticut. And this was during the time when the Patriot Act was first passed into law by Congress, which provided that a means for federal agents, FBI agents, to get at library records. And we were deeply unhappy about this, disturbed by it, because librarians had worked so hard in the past to provide protections for library users' privacy so that they wouldn't be convicted simply for making an inquiry about a topic that someone in government thought was forbidden. But in any case, we began advocating for changes in the Patriot Act, where it impacted library users' privacy and our right to know what the government was doing with that information. Because the biggest issue for us as well was the gag order. How could we know what the government was doing? How could we know that people's rights were being protected? How could we know that they weren't crossing the line as far as constitutional protections without that kind of transparency? And the Patriot Act took all that away from us. So we had been doing the advocacy. I had actually been doing trainings for librarians on the Patriot Act and what libraries could do to address it, what policies to have in place, what they should do if they were approached for library records, and how they could and could not push back. And the thing with the gag order, of course, is it makes it difficult to ask for legal advice or to even reference your experience to advocate against the Patriot Act. What happened with the Library Connection is that they actually did receive a demand that was authorized under Patriot Act provisions, a national security letter, asking for the names of every person that had used a set of computers for over a period of time, which really is a fishing expedition if you think about it. There was no target. They just wanted to collect all the browsing histories of thousands of people without offering good cause for it. And I have to say, George Christian and the other members of the board of the Library Connection made a very brave decision. They decided they were going to step out, risk going to prison under the Patriot Act, and challenge the Patriot Act and the provision that had been served on their library on this issue. They did reach out to us and they said in confidence they were going to go with the ACLU and they needed expert advice. And so both ALA and the Freedom to Read Foundation, which I also work with, provided expert witnesses and legal expertise through the Freedom to Read Foundation to support their cause as they litigated with the ACLU representing them. It was one of the great successes in vindicating the rights of the reader to privacy in their inquiries. Ultimately, the district court decided that the FBI had to provide certain information about the inquiry that would have revealed probably why their inquiry was being made. And also it set up a constitutional challenge to the provision that authorized national security letters. So they kind of won what I would call a little bit of a Pyrrhic victory. The FBI, rather than litigating those issues, having to reveal information they didn't want to reveal, and not wanting to tee up a court challenge to the Patriot Act, withdrew the national security letter. So the library was never had to turn over the information. And amazingly, there was no opposition to the librarian's own motion to allow them to talk about their experience. So George Christian has become one of the strongest advocates against government secrecy, the protection of library users' privacy, and talks very eloquently about his experience in fighting the kind of government intrusion that threatens to chill everyone's ability to read as they wish without the government looking over their shoulder.
Great. It's wonderful as a historian myself to be able to learn more about that. I think we don't always know the roots of some of the things we take for granted today and kind of how we got through. So thank you for sharing. You mentioned the Freedom to Read Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, the Freedom to Read Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit, and its whole mission is to conduct litigation and legal action on behalf of library users' freedom to read and the ability of librarians themselves to provide the information they deem fit for their communities, whatever that community is, a school, a public community, university community. And so we've either litigated cases on behalf of librarians, or we have filed amicus briefs in important cases that deal with the First Amendment right to access information, the First Amendment right to read, and it's really a mixture of rights, both First Amendment and other constitutional provisions, the right to read in private anonymously as well. And because the Freedom to Read Foundation has a broader First Amendment mission in addition, we also participate in the defense of the freedom of the press. So we'll join with the Reporters Committee to fight for the right of reporters to access government information or to be free from harassment. We've joined in other amicus briefs to defend the right to access what is either forbidden or unorthodox information that is protected by the First Amendment. Even the right to protest, we've participated in those cases as well. So we have a broad brief. And we also have a smaller brief in supporting LIS education for graduate students. We find that often a program doesn't always have the capacity it would like to offer training on academic freedom and intellectual freedom and the law. And so we support certain universities' coursework in the LIS program that provides training and information, academic information about those topics, so that those courses remain available to young persons new to the profession, people who are preparing to become librarians and information professionals.
Great. And I'm sure that many folks who are viewing this conversation today are themselves beneficiaries of that expertise. Now, you have done a lot of advocacy work in the space where public and K-12. We're going to have a lot of folks who are listening today who come from the academic space. So can you tell us how you see what's been going on in the public and K-12 spheres recently, how that informs the conversation for academic libraries?
Well, no secret that what we've been seeing is an organized group by a number of advocacy folks to remove books from schools and libraries, public libraries and school libraries that deal with the lives and experiences of LGBTQIA persons, and also a real attack on the ability to read diverse thought on race and racism and its impact on our society and its place in our history. They're doing this under the name of critical race theory. Excuse my bunny ear quotes, but as we know, that what they're attacking is not critical race theory, and that it's not being taught in K through 12 schools, but it's been turned into a moral panic, a boogeyman that has resulted in the removal of books by Black authors, books dealing with racism in US society, books dealing with alternative perspectives on our history with slavery and racism. And similarly, we've now seen attack on gender ideology in schools and public libraries. That's, again, their phrase. But what it, again, has mounted to that it's been silencing the voices of gay, queer, and transgender people and removing books from the shelves that reflect their experiences. And what we're now seeing is legislation that has imposed these restrictions on K through 12 either has already been applied to public universities or is being proposed to be applied to public universities. One of the most insidious bills we've seen in the last, well, it just was introduced last week, but it's called the Stop Sexualization of Children Act. And it openly says that no federal funding can be used to provide information to young people about gender identity, sexual orientation, or even sex education. And it would have a real, all of this has an impact on universities in that how are students prepared for higher education? What do they know about? And what limits have been placed on their education? And really what has been communicated to them about what is appropriate inquiry and what is not appropriate inquiry, and having certain ideas stigmatized in their high school training. But more than that, I think that we will see increasing efforts to apply these restrictions that have been imposed in the K through 12 arena, which have been deemed improper for public libraries to provide to their communities, eventually applied to the university as well. And we're seeing this in the Don't Say Gay law in Florida, the Stop Woke Act in Florida, and other states have already adopted some of these laws like Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas, which will have a real impact on the ability of universities to teach the subjects that they want to teach without restriction, for the inquiry of academics, for the ability for university libraries to provide access fearlessly to all the resources that are needed by academics to just, to explore all the topics that they want to explore.
Yeah, when we were chatting prior to today, I think you mentioned that even the conversation and the debate around abortion and healthcare issues is causing some universities and some libraries to kind of catch themselves and wonder what the impact might be on their provision of resources.
Yeah, we can look at what's happened in Idaho. Idaho has passed one of the most restrictive abortion bans that even includes a restriction on discussing or providing information about abortion. And this has resulted in a memorandum to Idaho public libraries that, at least for a short period of time, that the health services couldn't talk about birth control, and that there could be no instruction about birth control or abortion, and that, or even sex education. And when you think about the needs of students and the academic interests of the faculty in healthcare and reproductive health, it was a really broad restriction. There's been pushback on that, but we are seeing the proposal of model legislation that would make it a crime to provide any information or instruction about abortion. So think about your medical schools, think about public health degrees and research, think about the needs of the students themselves who are relying on the university to provide health care. It can have a real impact to have that passed into law. So that is model legislation that we're monitoring, and we're anticipating that a number of those bills will be introduced in the 2023 legislative session. And so it's a matter of awareness and advocacy. We are preparing to aid librarians from all across the library ecosystem to advocate for the freedom to read and the freedom to provide information, accurate information about these topics to their library users as a whole. So, and I invite everyone really to follow our work both through ALA and its public policy and advocacy office that addresses these issues on behalf of the profession as a whole, but also Unite Against Book Bans, which provides tools to individuals and community groups to address censorship on the local level.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of work to be done. If there are folks who are early career who are joining us today, folks who are thinking of a shift in their career to come into the library space to start to work on some of these issues, what advice would you have for them on where to get started?
Well, certainly, I would encourage everyone to pursue professional development education in these areas. We know that the capacity of graduate schools is limited, budgets are limited. Students themselves have, want to achieve their degree. So it's important and incumbent on every information professional to learn what the law is, both nationally and in their state, and that in regarding the provision of library services. And this isn't just limited to First Amendment issues, but it's also related to academic freedom. It's also related to copyright, open access, these kinds of things. It's incumbent on every early stage professional to become acquainted with these topics and develop at least some depth of understanding, because it will inform their library service in the future. Inevitably, there's always a question about privacy or access that crops up, even in the university environment. Privacy can be a real issue in the university environment because of learning analytics and the platforms that are used now to really guide the lives of students throughout the campus. The same ID accesses the cafeteria that accesses books. Where is that data going? Who is keeping track of it? How is it kept safe? What is it revealing about the students' activities that should be protected by, especially the library services should be protected in that context. So having that early training is important. but also being prepared to join with professional organizations to advocate for the core values of the profession as a whole, both intellectual freedom, equity of access, equity of opportunity, privacy. These are all issues that are contested right now, especially in state houses and in local politics, and being prepared to advocate not only for your own institution and your own practice, but for the practice and institutions in the community, your K through 12 schools, your public libraries, because they support and uplift the whole academic enterprise. If you think about it, it's the library. Public libraries provide access and bridges for adult learners who are learning virtually, are providing the materials that are feeding the education of K through 12 students and preparing them for higher education. And so to make sure that they are being operated in a way that conforms with the best practices, that serves the wider educational needs, and that they're making these resources available without discrimination, and in a way that allows everyone to have access to them without running into barriers that either result from technology, discrimination, or a desire to suppress certain ideas is important for everyone in the profession.
Now, this is going to be your second Charleston conference. Surprise, we're recording this before the conference actually takes place. What are you looking forward to most?
I'm looking forward to doing a deep dive. I don't often get to attend conferences and learn myself, and so I'm looking forward to that. There are a number of panels I've already identified as being of interest, either acquiring new knowledge or deepening my knowledge of certain topics around academic freedom and intellectual freedom, privacy, and simply the realm of publishing, which is always fascinating for me. So I'm looking forward to coming to the conference and meeting with folks, and learning more myself. My prior visit was to talk about, and again, censorship, talking about internet filtering at the university level and the impact of filters on limiting access to ideas and information based on standards that may not have even been set by the university itself. And so I think in some ways we'll be continuing that conversation when we meet at Charleston, and I'm looking forward to it.
Now, you're participating in the long-running long arm of the law session, and I don't want to scoop that. Folks who want to learn more will be able to watch that in person, watch it as part of the virtual conference attendance. But can you tease a little bit about some of the topics that you're going to be hitting on?
Well, we'll be, I've been asked to talk more broad, more in depth about what we're seeing happening at the local level and what books are being challenged and why, but also to talk about some of these. I alluded briefly to legislative initiatives. And so we're seeing very targeted legislative initiatives that are not only attacking access to information, but attacking information professionals themselves. And we'll talk about that and what we see for the future. And so, we are hoping to have a good in-depth conversation about both what is going on right now in society, but also talking about what we're seeing government elected officials do with the law that might impact the ability to provide information to the information professionals community.
Thanks. I guess a lot of us are going to be following those issues quite closely. So thank you again for taking the time to join us today and to have such a candid and broad-ranging discussion about the issues that are so important to you and that are important to us as well.
Thank you for inviting me, Heather. It's been great. I look forward to seeing you.
Mm-hmm.